When my son passed away, my daughter-in-law kicked me out of my own house, threw my bags into the street. That is not just a story. It is my life, and it all began on the day I buried my boy. The church bells tolled, deep and mournful, as I stood at the graveside with my hands trembling on the polished coffin. My only son lay inside, the same boy I had raised with calloused hands and sleepless nights, the same boy who once ran through these fields with laughter that shook the air.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from.
Now, he was silent, lowered into the earth that would never release him. Around me, neighbors cried. Old friends placed their hands on my shoulder, offering comfort I could not feel. My eyes burned, but no tears would come. The grief was too heavy, pressing down on me until I could scarcely breathe. Beside the coffin stood my daughter-in-law. She was still unmoving, her eyes fixed not on the man she had lost, but on the distance beyond. No tears touched her face, no tremor shook her hands. Her coldness was louder than any wail, a silence sharper than a blade. As the priest spoke, his words blurred into nothing. I saw only the dirt waiting to cover my son, only the future that stretched before me in unbearable loneliness. I pressed my palm against the coffin one last time and whispered a vow to the earth. My son was gone, but my story, my fight, was only beginning. The house felt unbearably empty in the days after the funeral. Every chair, every picture frame, every corner seemed to echo with my son's absence. I tried to keep myself busy, sweeping the yard, watering the plants, and sitting by the window where he once stood. I thought grief was the hardest blow I would endure. I was wrong. One evening, my daughter-in-law came into the living room. Her footsteps were firm, her voice sharper than I had ever heard. "You cannot stay here anymore," she declared, her arms crossed tightly. I turned to face her, certain I had misunderstood. "This is my home," I said, my voice unsteady but calm. "I built these walls with my hands. Your husband, my son, grew up here. This is all I have left of him." Her expression did not soften. If anything, her eyes grew colder. "Your time is over. My husband is gone. This house is mine now. You have no right here." The words struck harder than any blow. My knees weakened, and I gripped the arm of my chair to steady myself. I searched her face for mercy, but I found none. She looked at me, not as family, not even as a man in mourning, but as an intruder to be pushed out. That night, as I sat alone in the silence of my room, I realized that the true betrayal was not death stealing my son. It was cruelty, alive and standing under my roof. The sun had barely risen when the shouting began. I was sitting quietly in my chair, staring at the faded photograph of my son, when my daughter-in-law stormed into my room. "Pack your things. You are leaving today," she barked, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Before I could rise, she dragged my old suitcase from the corner and began stuffing my belongings into it with rough hands. My shirts, worn from years of labor, were crumpled without care. A framed photo of my boy slipped from the table, cracking as it hit the floor. I reached for it, but she had already pulled the suitcase out into the hall. I followed her slowly, my heart thudding painfully, and pleaded, "Please, this is my home. I built this house with your husband. Every stone, every wall carries my sweat. Do not do this to me." Her eyes flashed with contempt. Without a word, she flung the door wide open and hurled the suitcase into the street. The zipper burst, spilling my clothes, my shoes, even the broken photo frame across the dirt road. Neighbors stopped in their tracks. Some gasped, others whispered, but no one stepped forward. They watched as I knelt in the dust, my trembling hands gathering what was left of my life. My face burned with shame, yet I held back my tears. That moment carved itself into my soul. She thought she had broken me, but humiliation can grow into something far stronger. The street was long and unkind beneath my feet. With every step, the weight of my battered suitcase pulled at my arm, the zipper half broken, clothes threatening to spill into the dust. Behind me, the house I had built stood like a stranger, its windows staring coldly as if they no longer knew me. My chest ached, not just from grief, but from the hollow emptiness of being cast out like a beggar. Neighbors watched from their doors and windows, their whispers brushing against my back. Some faces held pity, others curiosity, but no one moved to walk beside me. I had carried these people's burdens once, helped them patch roofs, lent tools, shared bread when they had none. Now, when I needed only a place to rest, the street was silent. The sun climbed higher, burning the top of my head. My legs grew heavy, each step slower than the last. I thought of my son, of how he would have never let me walk alone like this. He would have carried the suitcase for me, guided me home. But my son was gone, and the woman who bore his name had cast me aside as though I were nothing. I stopped beneath a tree at the edge of town, setting the suitcase down. My hands shook as I pressed them against my knees to catch my breath. Heartbroken and abandoned, I felt the weight of the world pressing me into the dirt. Yet deep inside, something refused to die. I sat beneath the shade of the old tree, my suitcase at my side, and my mind drifted backward to the days when everything was different. The house she had thrown me from was not just walls and a roof. It was my life's work, the story of my youth, the proof of every sacrifice my late wife and I had made together. I remembered the first stone I laid, my hands raw and blistered from mixing cement. My wife carried buckets of water from the river, her back bent, her smile bright even through exhaustion. We had nothing then, only determination and love. We slept on mats on the bare floor, dreaming of a day when our son would run across the wooden planks we nailed down with trembling hands. Each payday, I set aside coins in the rusted tin box, refusing new clothes, skipping meals, all so we could buy more nails, more wood, more bricks. She stitched curtains from old cloth, painted the walls with colors she mixed herself. Piece by piece, we built not just a home but a dream. The day we finished, we stood outside together, looking at the modest house with tears in our eyes. We had started with nothing but ended with everything. Our son grew within those walls, learning to walk, learning to laugh, filling every corner with life. Now, to be cast out of it by someone who never lifted a hand to build it was a wound deeper than grief itself. That night, as I sat alone in the cramped corner of a friend's shed, I opened my battered suitcase to search for a blanket. My hands trembled as I shifted through folded shirts, an old photograph of my wife, and a rusted pocket knife that once belonged to my father. At the very bottom, wrapped in yellowing paper, I found something I had nearly forgotten existed. It was a leather envelope, stiff with age. I untied the frayed string and unfolded the papers within. My eyes widened as I read the faded ink, my heart pounding harder with each line. The documents bore my name, proof of ownership, the title of the house, signed and notarized decades ago. My late wife's signature was there too, written in the graceful strokes I had watched her practice when we were young. The realization struck me like thunder. That house, the very one she had driven me out of, was still mine. It had never been transferred, never sold, never left my hands. Legally, by every measure, it remained under my name. I sat frozen, the weight of truth pressing against my chest. Anger and relief tangled together inside me. She had humiliated me, mocked me, stripped me of dignity in front of neighbors, yet she was standing on ground that never belonged to her. Slowly, a fire began to kindle in my heart. I was not powerless, not broken. The law was on my side, and justice was closer than she could ever imagine. I held the documents in my trembling hands, the truth burning brighter than any lantern. The house, every brick, every nail, every inch of soil was still mine. My late wife's handwriting stared back at me, reminding me of nights we worked by candlelight, saving, sacrificing, dreaming of a home where love would last forever. And then I thought of her, my son's widow, parading around as if she were queen, mocking my sorrow, discarding me like garbage in front of neighbors. She had spit on my grief, spit on the memory of my son, and claimed what was never hers. My jaw clenched, and I felt something shift deep inside me. Grief had weighed me down, made me stumble like an old man too tired to fight. But this discovery, it gave me new strength. This was no longer about just reclaiming four walls and a roof. No, this was about dignity, about justice, about making her taste every ounce of the cruelty she had served me. I vowed, then and there, that I would not stop until I stripped her of everything she clung to, her false pride, her comfort, her illusions of power. She would learn that grief reveals the soul, and hers was nothing but greed and venom. I folded the papers carefully, tucked them close to my chest, and whispered into the night, "You thought I was finished, but you have only awakened the part of me that does not forgive." The battle had just begun. The days that followed were cloaked in silence. To anyone watching, I was just a broken old man, wandering with bowed shoulders, clutching my suitcase like a beggar. But inside, every step carried purpose. At dawn, I walked to the municipal registry, the smell of old paper and dust filling my lungs. I requested copies of the deeds, my fingers steady as I signed forms with a name that still bound me to that house. The clerk looked surprised when he saw my age, but I gave no explanation. I simply waited, silent, until the stamped documents slid across the counter. At the bank, I asked for records of my son's accounts. Some were still under my authority as guarantor. I left with files heavy in my bag, my heart heavier still, but fueled by a new determination. Each receipt, each letter, each yellow slip of proof from decades past was a weapon, quietly forged in the shadows. Evenings, I returned to the small rented room I now called shelter. By candlelight, I laid everything across a wooden table. Receipts of payments made with my wife's careful handwriting, tax records bearing my signature, the very foundation of my life's toil. I spoke little. I smiled less. Neighbors thought I was fading, but in truth, I was gathering my strength. Brick by brick, document by document. She had taken my son and my peace, but the law was still mine, and I would wield it like a blade she never saw coming. I sat in the leather chair across from a man half my age, his spectacles sliding down the bridge of his nose as he shuffled through the pile of papers I had carried like treasure. My heart thumped, not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to be spoken aloud. The lawyer lifted his eyes to me, astonishment flickering in them. "Sir, these documents are airtight. The property deed is still under your name. The accounts, your son never changed the beneficiaries. And here," he tapped the folder, "his business license was filed under your guardianship. Legally, it is all yours." I breathed in deeply, the air filling me like fire. For days I had feared I was chasing ghosts, but his words struck like thunder. She had strutted and boasted, throwing me out as if I were nothing, yet on paper she was nothing more than a trespasser, a pretender draped in arrogance. "Then I can take it back?" I asked, my voice low, almost dangerous. "Not just take it back," he replied, leaning forward, "but ensure she loses everything she has been flaunting. The law is on your side." I nodded slowly, my knotted hands tightening on the chair's armrests. This was no longer grief. This was war, and the battlefield was written in ink. As I left his office, sunlight struck my face, and for the first time since the funeral, I allowed myself a grim smile. She had no idea her downfall had already begun. I returned to the neighborhood as though defeated, shoulders bent, eyes hollow, carrying nothing but that same battered suitcase. The neighbors watched from their porches, whispering that the poor old man had lost everything. I let them believe it. Appearances were my armor now. From the gates of my own house, I could hear the shrill laughter of the widow. She hosted gatherings, music spilling into the street, as though my son's death had been nothing more than her ticket to freedom. She paraded through the garden in new dresses, bracelets clinking on her wrist, boasting of her new life. I walked past with my head bowed, careful not to look too long. She sneered sometimes, asking mockingly if I had found a park bench yet to sleep on. I only gave her silence. That silence was the mask behind which my plan sharpened. Each night, in the small room I rented, I laid out the lawyer's notes, the deeds, the receipts. Every detail was aligned, every trap set. Yet patience was my greatest weapon. She believed she had broken me. She believed she had won. And so I played the role of the ruined father, waiting while she flaunted her false triumph. The more she celebrated, the more reckless she became. The more reckless she became, the deeper her downfall would cut. I whispered into the stillness of the night, "Keep laughing, child, for when your laughter ends, it will end forever." The house that once held my wife's laughter and my son's dreams now echoed with noise that felt like desecration. Bright lanterns lined the porch, music blared into the street, and cars filled the driveway as if it were a carnival. I stood at a distance, watching as my daughter-in-law turned mourning into a parade of arrogance. Inside, she threw parties where champagne overflowed, and guests gossiped without shame. She flaunted jewels purchased with money she had no right to touch, boasting about her new life of independence. I heard her voice carry through the open windows, mocking my family's name, ridiculing the sacrifices my wife and I had made to build the very walls she now disgraced. She was weak, she told her friends, laughter dripping like venom, always talking about hard work and values. And him, she tilted her glass toward the dark where I lingered, too old and too pathetic to matter. They should thank me for bringing life into this dead house. Her cruelty was boundless. She wasted money as if the well could never run dry. While I knew the truth that every coin, every account, every brick still belonged to me. I clenched my fists in the shadows, but I did not move. Not yet. Let her revel, let her mock. Every careless laugh, every wasted dollar was only tightening the noose she did not see. The day would come when her music would fall silent and the crowd would vanish. The first blow came quietly, like a whisper slipping beneath the door. She strutted into the town's finest boutique, heels clicking on marble, her laughter rising above the morning hush. Draped in silk and dripping with false confidence, she piled dresses and jewels into the clerk's arms as though wealth were endless. At the counter, she handed over her shining bank card with a smirk, already imagining the jealous stares of onlookers. But then came the sound, a short, flat beep. Declined. The clerk's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Do you have another card?" Confusion flickered across her face. She pressed the card back with annoyance, demanding they try again. The same beep, louder this time, echoing like a judgment. Whispers stirred behind her. Eyes that once admired her extravagance now watched with curiosity and amusement. Her cheeks flushed crimson. She fumbled for another card, but each one returned the same result. Declined, declined, declined. The clerk, polite but firm, gathered the items back into her arms. "Perhaps you should contact your bank," she suggested softly. The widow stormed out empty-handed, her heels striking the floor like hammer blows, but her arrogance had cracked. I watched from across the street, invisible in my plain coat and quiet stance. My silence concealed the satisfaction burning inside me. This was only the beginning. The empire she thought was hers would crumble piece by piece, until nothing remained but the ruins of her pride. The morning was quiet when the letter arrived. A crisp envelope, stamped with the seal of the court, slid beneath the heavy iron gate of the house that was no longer hers. She found it on the front steps as she returned from her morning stroll, clutching her useless bank cards like talismans against a curse she could not yet understand. Curiosity turned to dread as she tore it open. Her eyes darted across the words, each sentence striking harder than the last. By order of law, property rights restored. Original owner, Mr. R. My name was written there in bold, undeniable ink. The house she had claimed, the house she had desecrated with her feasts and her cruelty, was no longer hers to command. Her scream shattered the calm of the street. Neighbors peeked from their windows as she tore the notice to shreds, only to sink onto the steps, clutching the pieces as though they might change their meaning. She raged, shouting that it was a mistake, that she was the rightful mistress of this home. But the law does not bend for arrogance. From a distance, I watched in silence. My heart did not race, nor did my hands tremble. Justice had begun its march, steady and cold. She had thrown me out with my suitcase in front of these same neighbors. Now they would see her fall from the very throne she built on lies. The house was mine again, and her ruin was only halfway written. The street gathered like a theater audience when the movers arrived. They carried boxes, bags, and armfuls of clothes from the house, piling them on the curb in plain sight. Her possessions, once paraded like trophies, now lay scattered like refuse. Silk dresses fluttered in the breeze, shoes toppled onto the dirt, framed photographs cracked against the pavement. She stood on the porch, hair unkempt, eyes wild with rage. "You can't do this to me!" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the morning air. But the workers ignored her. They had their orders. Neighbors leaned against fences, whispering in clusters. Some covered their mouths to hide smirks, others simply watched in silence. They remembered the parties, the mocking words, the arrogance. Now, they murmured, the mask had slipped. The same woman who once looked down on them was now exposed, flailing in humiliation. One child pointed at the growing pile of boxes. "Mama, why is she moving?" The mother hushed him, but her eyes betrayed the answer. Because she stole what was never hers. She tried to gather her things, clutching dresses and trinkets to her chest, but her arms were too small, her pride too fragile. Every scream, every desperate gesture only deepened the spectacle. From across the street, I stood with steady hands and a calm heart. Once, she had thrown my belongings out under these same watchful eyes. Now, fate had balanced the scales. Her empire was crumbling, and everyone was there to witness it. That evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, there was a knock on the door of the house she had once claimed. I opened it slowly, already knowing who would be there. She stood on the threshold, no longer the woman who had mocked and paraded her false triumphs. Her clothes were wrinkled, her eyes swollen from tears, her hands trembling as they clutched the doorframe. Gone was the arrogance. What remained was desperation. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. I was grieving. I didn't know what I was doing. I was angry, lost. I thought lashing out would ease the pain. Her words tumbled over one another, a stream of excuses woven with sobs. She fell to her knees, clutching at my sleeve, as if the touch itself might change my heart. "I never meant to hurt you," she cried. "It was the grief. It blinded me. Please, don't take everything from me. I've nowhere to go." Her tears streaked the porch where once she had stood laughing as my bags were tossed into the street. Now she begged for mercy from the same man she had tried to destroy. I looked down at her, silent, the memory of every insult, every humiliation burning fresh in my mind. Grief may have opened the door to cruelty, but cruelty had been her choice. Her words pleaded for forgiveness, but all I heard was the echo of her laughter on the day she cast me aside. The day of reckoning arrived without ceremony. Papers had been signed, accounts transferred, locks changed. Every tie between her and the life she had stolen was severed with the precision of a blade. She stood outside the gate, clutching a single torn suitcase, her eyes darting across the faces of the neighbors who gathered once more. No one stepped forward. No one offered comfort. They remembered too well her cruelty, her arrogance, her laughter at another man's ruin. Now she was the one cast out, stripped of wealth, stripped of status, stripped of shelter. "Where am I supposed to go?" she shouted, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation. "You can't just leave me like this." I remained on the porch, my gaze steady, my silence louder than any curse. She had begged, pleaded, tried to drape her sins in grief. But grief does not turn kindness into malice. Her cruelty had been a choice, and choices carry consequences. At last, the gate closed with a heavy clang, the sound echoing down the street. She stumbled backward, her tears mixing with the dust of the road, the crowd parting to let her pass but offering no hand. Homeless, penniless, and despised, she faded into the distance, swallowed by the very emptiness she had once tried to force upon me. For the first time since my son's funeral, the air around the house felt lighter. Justice had spoken, and mercy had no place in its verdict. When the gate shut behind her, I stepped back into the house that was mine by right and by memory. The air inside was still heavy, with the faint scent of dust and old wood. Yet beneath it lingered something deeper, the echoes of a life once full. I lowered myself into the armchair where I had so often sat with my son, listening to his plans for the future. The cushions had sagged, the fabric worn thin, but to me it was a throne reclaimed. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I heard his laughter bouncing against the walls, quick and warm, chasing away the silence. In the dining room, the long table stood just as it always had. I remembered meals shared there, my wife's gentle scolding when my son reached too quickly for bread, the way the three of us would talk until night stole through the windows. Now, only I remained. My hand brushed across the walls as I walked, the plaster cool beneath my fingers. Every crack, every nail, every patch of faded paint spoke of sacrifice, of love, of years stitched together with sweat and perseverance. This was more than the house. It was the vessel of my family's memory. The silence no longer felt hollow. It was solemn, sacred, filled with the presence of those I had lost. And for the first time since the earth closed over my son, I felt something close to peace. The home had returned, and so had I. The days that followed were not filled with vengeance, but with quiet work. At dawn, I rolled up my sleeves and set to mending what had been neglected. Loose shutters were fastened, cracked tiles replaced, and the creaking gate was oiled until it swung open smooth as a whisper. Each repair was not just labor, it was remembrance. In the garden, once trampled by guests who came only for drink and laughter, I planted rows of flowers. Marigolds, roses, and white lilies now filled the soil. I remembered how my son used to bring his mother daisies on his way home, his hands dirty from the fields but his smile wide. As I pressed seeds into the earth, I felt his presence in the warmth of the sun on my back. Inside, I polished the wooden frames where family photographs hung. My wife's face smiled from behind the glass, my son's eyes bright with youth and hope. The house seemed to breathe again, as though it, too, had been waiting for restoration. Neighbors passed by and slowed their steps, watching quietly as the home transformed. No one mocked, no one whispered. They saw not a bitter old man, but a father rebuilding his sanctuary, a man reclaiming dignity through patience and care. Every flower that bloomed, every nail driven into place was a vow that this house would never again be a stage for cruelty. It would stand as a monument to love, sacrifice, and my son's legacy. The final nail was hammered, the last weed pulled, the last photograph hung in its rightful place. The house stood whole again, not just in structure but in spirit. It was no longer marred by the arrogance of a usurper. It was once again the home my wife and I had built, the home where my son had laughed and dreamed. That evening, as dusk stretched long shadows across the walls, I walked slowly from room to room. Each corner whispered a memory, my wife humming in the kitchen, my son rushing through the doorway, his voice alive with plans for tomorrow. The silence that lingered now was not heavy with grief, but with reverence. At the threshold, I paused. The air outside carried the sound of neighbors settling into their own homes. No more whispers about my downfall, no more pitying glances. They had seen justice with their own eyes. They knew cruelty had been repaid in full measure. I reached for the key, its weight solid in my hand. With a steady turn, the lock clicked shut, sealing away the walls, the flowers, the memories, and the legacy I had reclaimed. My grip did not tremble, my heart did not ache. Justice had been delivered not by anger's flame, but by patience's hand. Vengeance was complete, dignity restored. As I turned from the door, the night felt calm, and for the first time in many years, I walked away not burdened by loss, but carried by peace.
Your time means a lot. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, just click the box on the left.